The signing of the MOU is an important step forward after many, many weeks of regional instability and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, as well as retaliatory attacks on the Gulf states where I was last week. So we have to see this moment for what it is, which is there has been progress made and there is a path to peace. We are seeing positive developments, in particular regarding the Strait of Hormuz, but there is a tentativeness in the peace because over the next 60 days, there will be negotiations on key facets of the MOU, and in particular nuclear non-proliferation, one of the key elements of the peace. And Canada stands for nuclear non-proliferation, so this is a very important element of the negotiations that will occur and ensue. I spoke with my Pakistani counterpart yesterday, and as you know, Pakistan was deeply involved in the negotiations that led to the MOU being concluded and signed. And in fact, he had indicated to me that he wanted to invite me to come to a signing ceremony in Switzerland, but at the very last minute they had to change the venue and it wasn't possible to make that work. All that to say that I've decided to go to Pakistan in the coming weeks to engage in deeper conversations about what the peace over the next 60 days will look like at the end of this set of negotiations. But without question, it's a positive development and we need to keep moving forward in this direction.
Do you see a role for Canada then in that piece or in the negotiation, in any, like a tangible role here?
So it's a good question. As you know, the work that is happening at the level of the Department of National Defense and with the chiefs of defense staff across like-minded countries, including the UK and France and that group of countries that they've led, is what are the tangible elements that Canada will put on the table along with other countries. And those are in fact the conversations that are happening right now as to what the particular elements might be from each member country. I was speaking with both my counterparts in the UK and France, Yvette Cooper and Jean-Noël Barrot, last week about this very point. And we agreed that let's let that MOU come to signature and then work in a complementary fashion so that there isn't overlapping expertise being put on the table, but that countries are coming forward where there is necessity. And so very much this is the moment where that conversation is occurring, and primarily at the defense, chief of defense level staff. And I know that Minister McGuinty is deeply involved in those conversations as well. In the long term, Canada's role has been one that is very much working amongst multilateral partners. And I say that having just returned from the Gulf region, having just returned from Manama, Bahrain, where I was meeting with the Gulf Cooperation Council. Every member of the Gulf Cooperation Council is represented there, welcoming Canada's participation. Because you'll have to remember, over the course of the last number of weeks since February 28th, Canada is one country that has consistently shown up for the Gulf countries when they've been facing retaliatory attacks. And in particular, I was the first foreign minister to physically go to Bahrain and the Gulf Cooperation Council since February 28th. And I also had been in Saudi Arabia at the end of March, beginning of April. All that to say, Canada holds that reputation, if you will, of being a country that cares deeply for regional peace and stability, for cessation of hostilities, for nuclear non-proliferation, for the rights of the civilian population, and that's the role we'll continue to play diplomatically. Thank you.
Prime Minister characterized the war as worth it because of the outcome.
Merci tout le monde. C'est la fin de session. C'est un jour plus tôt que dans l'horaire, so we adjourn a day earlier. And in the mix, as ever, there's a unanimous consent motion to put together a number of bills the government wanted to see across the finish line and do it by unanimous consent. I would have rather stayed and gotten the bills done correctly. I'm very concerned that Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Bill, which just went through the House, what is called on division. There have been a number of stories in the media for which I appreciate the diligence of the journalists in noticing how much more frequently in this new government we don't have recorded votes on even very controversial bills. So the Civil Liberties Associations, Open Media, Citizen Lab, numerous experts in technology and privacy and constitutional law have said, don't pass this bill. We had a closure motion, programming motion. I attended I don't know how many hours of sessions in the Public Safety Committee with my amendments at the ready, only to be, in the end, and thanks to a Conservative member of Parliament who said before we went through the programming motion and there was a baillon, the guillotine, the end of debate, said, well, maybe, shouldn't Miss May be allowed to say something? So I was allowed to speak briefly to my amendments last night, before midnight. But it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right in my bones that a bill is controversial, establishing a new surveillance infrastructure, should be passed with a committee just having a rule that says we can't debate amendments before we vote on them. And then for people in my position, that would be me and the member for Vancouver East, Jenny Kwan, with amendments and not really allowed to participate in the meeting at all. So for people who don't notice what happens, I want you to know that when they said unanimous consent, that Bill C-22 goes through on division. I stood to make it clear on the record that the Green Party opposes Bill C-22, and Jenny Kwan stood on the record to make sure everyone knows the NDP opposes Bill C-22. But it's worth noting that every single opposition party opposed a bill that was pushed through just moments ago with a unanimous consent motion and no vote. The gathering forces that affront democracy itself in this place are hard to observe from the outside, but I feel them keenly from the inside. Nous avons maintenant une vraie diminution des droits dans la démocratie pour chaque député, mais aussi pour les citoyens du Canada. Nous avons un gouvernement qui va faire avec force les choses et avec vitesse. Mais qu'est-ce que c'est accompli avec vitesse? Nous avons établi, mettre sur pied les agences, les nouveaux bureaux, mais pour protéger l'environnement, pour protéger la nature, pour protéger notre santé, nous avons ralenti. We're going backwards. And as everyone says to each other in this place, have a great summer. I say to Canadians, take your summer and make sure your MP knows you don't like the things you're seeing. Make sure your MP, especially a Liberal MP, knows that we noticed what was in the Liberal platform. It was promises on climate change. It wasn't promises to build pipelines. To notice that there was nothing in the Liberal platform that said, we will make the most progressive move in over half a century to make it easier to have toxic pesticides spread across the landscape than ever before. That was it was never in their platform, it wasn't in the budget, but we just pushed it through on Bill C-30, the Spring Economic Statement Implementation Bill. Malheureusement, maintenant, c'est la fin pour cette session. Nous avons l'été pour prendre l'effort pour encourager les militants écolos de faire les efforts plus hauts. We need to be louder, we need to be clearer, and we need to make sure that this government adopts, if it's a mid-course, but certainly some course correction fast, because the climate doesn't have time to wait, nature doesn't have time to wait, and people in this country who are suffering under the economic burdens they face don't have time to waste. Thank you very much, and je suis disponible pour les questions. Okay. Merci. À la prochaine. Who's next?
See all you here today at the last day and the last hour of the session. And I hope that you can have a good session. And also, this is my first time holding a press conference. So be nice, be kind to me. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Chak Au. Member of Parliament for Richmond Center Mapo. I'm here today to announce that I introduced my private member's bill yesterday on stopping supply to save lives. This is a bill to stop the supply of fentanyl on our streets, which would kill people. The background of this bill is that we know that we have seen the crisis of fentanyl in our country, in our communities, and on our streets. And in particular, we know that in the last 10 years, we have more than 56,000 people died because of drug overdose, and which is greater than the number of soldiers, Canadian soldiers, being killed during the Second World War. And also, the bill I would like to be known as Emily's Legacy Act, because in January 2025, a young girl at the age of 14 died at home because of drug overdose. And she was such a lovely lady. She was such a young, energetic girl, and she could have a very bright future, but because of somebody sold her the poison that took her life, she was unable to fulfill her life to the fullest. And since her death, her mom has been a very strong advocate for greater and higher penalties for those killers who sold drugs to young people and other people on the streets, knowingly that it would kill people. So in a nutshell, my Parliamentary Act talks about for those drug dealers who are producing, trafficking, importing, or exporting large quantities of fentanyl should face severe penalties. So for those who do more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl and similar drugs, they should face life sentencing without parole for 25 years. And for people or criminals who did the same thing for a quantity between 20 milligrams to 40 milligrams, they should face a 15 years imprisonment. And if there's other aggravating factors, such as they have their activities near schools, treatment centers, or places where vulnerable people would appear, that could make the sentencing up to 25 years. So in a nutshell, we want to protect our kids, protect our communities, and to stop the supply to save lives. Okay, good. No questions? Okay, good, thank you.
Minister Fraser, can I just ask you about the MAID committee report yesterday? I know
Sure.
you said you want to review the recommendations and review the evidence. What would cause you to change your mind from what the committee recommended?
Well, I don't want to prejudge what factor I've not yet dug into. I do want to sincerely take the time to understand the recommendations and why the committee landed where they did. That's going to take, I expect, at least a minimum of a few days to get through the report, probably a few weeks beyond that before I have an opportunity to engage with others across Canada on the perspectives that they may wish to add to the consideration.
Would you consider the idea of a Supreme Court reference?
Look, I don't want to prejudge what the range of options should be. I like to start at the wide end of the funnel with all possibilities under consideration. But as I come to understand what the best path forward will look like and consult with my colleagues in government, I then will be in a better position to understand which options we're going to consider most seriously.
And not to be cavalier about it, but the committee just did all that work. Why do you have to do it again?
Well, that's the spirit of the committee was to establish recommendations to government. I never want to blindly accept recommendations before satisfying myself that those are the right recommendations. But they do dramatically accelerate the work. I'm not starting from scratch. I'm starting from their recommendations and the evidence upon which those recommendations were based. The responsible thing to do, in my own view, is to undertake an exercise that will allow me to come to a conclusion based upon those recommendations. This is a normal process of governance, and in my experience usually leads to better decision making.
And then legislatively, something would need to be done, like if you were going to accept their recommendation or perhaps choose another path that would delay the implementation in March, right? Like, is that...
It would depend what decision is taken, and
Right.
both whether you would need legislation and what that legislation would be. It's entirely possible we would be looking at legislation flowing from this, but again, that depends on conclusions that we've not yet reached.
And what would you think is a feasible timeline for that?
Uh,
you want to come back to the House with a decision? Like, when are you going to make a decision?
I
on
would
which way
expect
to go?
I would expect over the course of the summer we'll certainly be able to determine what the next step ought to look like on the issues that were under consideration of the committee's report, as well as other outstanding issues on medical assistance to dying.
Do you have a position on this issue?
Well, obviously my position will be informed by the work
like
that
a
I've just
personal
described.
position,
I've
do
got
you?
a personal perspective on medical assistance in dying. I don't want to ground a conclusion on the next steps from a legislative point of view. But everyone I've spoken to has someone they know who's gone through this process. I've seen really horrible diseases impact people that I care about. I've seen heartbreaking stories of people who did not want to live through the same fate that their parents have lived through, and now are considering whether this is, or in fact have considered, and in one instance taken medical assistance in dying to prevent them going through just a horrific life experience that they've seen their loved ones go through. The issue couldn't be more personal, it couldn't be more serious, and I intend to take the time to get it right over the summer. Okay, thanks very much. Hey, bon été tout le monde.
Good summer.